Okay, no introduction today. Can I just go?
What I was saying is we only introduce people on the first day of their course because we're assuming it's the same people attending the next.
Okay, cool. So
course.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Zuleika and summer school team, and welcome back, people from yesterday. So at least there's still people that came back. That's good. Before we get going with the formal presentation, are there any questions from yesterday? Any reflections from yesterday that anybody wants to share or just clarify before we get going? I know there was a lot of information that we shared yesterday, but any comments or questions or clarification from anyone from yesterday? Doesn't seem like it.
So go check the chat, Abbas, if you want to respond to any chat from yesterday, maybe. I was just checking if there's any. No, there isn't. I think it was dealt with yesterday.
Oops, got on screen now. Sorry, I just need to bring my presentation down here. Are you seeing my screens later?
Sorry, I'm mute again. Sorry. Yes, I can see it very clearly.
The presentation screen?
Yeah. You maybe want to go to full screen slideshow, perhaps, or.
Yeah, is it there now?
Not yet.
Man. Not full screen.
No, not yet. No, it's not full screen. Lance, what do you see?
It's full screen on my end.
Oh, okay. Then my computer must be. Well, if everyone else, are you all? Can you all see the full screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Let's get going then.
Yeah. Okay, then it's just don't worry.
So from yesterday, just a very quick recap what we did yesterday. We spoke a little about futures. There's a field called future studies, and that you can't predict the future, but you can be part of creating this different future. We spoke a little bit about complexity, and when you deal with complex, wicked problems, you need to think systemically about them and don't jump to a technical solution quickly. Try and keep your head up and looking at it systemically, and you can use frameworks like the National Development Plan, AU 2063, and the Global Sustainable Development Goals when looking at things systemically. We then spoke about how do you bring creativity into organizations to help unlock innovation, and we introduced the concept of design thinking, and just reminded people that it's not a silver bullet for everything, but it is a really nice methodology to bring in not only creativity, but also to bring in a culture of empathy and putting the end user at the center of everything we do. And then we needed a little bit of a case study around Oricon, which is a large engineering company, and how they, over the last 3 years, have embedded design thinking into the organization to make them one of the leading innovative companies, and they've won some awards in that regard. So that was yesterday. Today we're going to talk about some of the tools, just introduce some of the tools, so you can see what what are the tools that we use. We're going to speak a little bit about disruption and how when you're trying to shape the future, you need to be prepared for disruption and how you need to be agile to respond to the disruption. And then we're going to look at UCT as a case study of how they are on their journey of embedding these skills of the future into the organization. So when we start talking about tools, and let's look specifically at the design thinking, because there's quite a lot of tools. And as I mentioned, if you Google design thinking, you'll find a lot of stuff out there. This is one of the more popular tools used in the design thinking methodology. And basically what it says is that you need to make sure that you're solving the right problem. And so therefore you need to ask the right questions from the end user. And so what happens in many cases is that we tend to jump to the last section there, which says what works, because we know how things work technically from an operational perspective. And so people are very comfortable in that what works. So if you get an instruction to build a bridge, it's a steel bridge or concrete bridge because we know how to build that. And what the design thinking methodology says is just take a step back and come back in the process to ask what is actually going on here. And so if you know what is actually going on, then you can ask sort of what scenarios can you potentially play with and what sort of prototyping can you do. And then you talk about what wows actually the client, what will really wow the end user. And so we see it's this sort of diverging and converging. So there's not just a way to look nice, it's actually this way of thinking where you diverge your thinking quickly as far as what is the actual problem, and you converge that to a prototype, and you diverge it again to see how you can really wow the client. And so this is a typical design wave used by Jean Litka. She's one of the world experts on design thinking. But again, like I say, there are many methodologies, there's many design waves out there. This is one that I really enjoy using. It's called the double diamond. Again, you start off with a problem, and instead of trying to get a solution, you just, what they call this discover period, you diverge very quickly and getting as many input as possible into an idea. So it is a different way of thinking in that normally, specifically this happens a lot in startups when people have ideas or great concept, they feel that they really need to get it 110% correct before they go speak to people. And what this methodology says is, don't do that. When you have a concept, a bright idea, go and speak to a broad range of people about it. People are scared that someone is going to steal your idea or your concept, but what makes an idea and concept successful is the passion behind it. So if you've come up with an idea or concept, the next person that you speak to about it won't have the passion that you have. And so it is about diverging thinking and getting input as quickly as possible. And then you converge into some sort of concept, or you define something from that input. And then you take that new thing and again, you diverge it through prototyping, testing, refining, and then you converge that to a solution. So this is double diamond, and we've used this quite successfully at UCT. So I'll show you what that looks like. This is also a very nice tool, when we talk about design thinking and this deep empathy for people, is how do you get a better understanding of end users? And we've used this tool with many of our clients, and we talk about big corporate government clients, and when we ask them, so do you know your customer? They're, yeah, we know our customer. And then when you do this exercise with them, it's called the SPICE model, and you unpack it in a workshop, and there's a lot of drawing taking place. You need to draw the client. Well, they first select a stakeholder, they draw them, and then they spice them, what we call spice them. And the SPICE stands for the social condition of that person, which social circles do they move in, the physical environment, what is the physical environment like, how do they identify themselves, the C stands for communication, how do they actually communicate, what are their communication styles, and then the E is for the emotional side, what is their current psychological, emotional state. And when you do this very simple exercise with people, they then realize how little they actually know about their client or about their end user. And so it's a very powerful tool when you run it in workshop exercises, when you need to do prototyping, and when you need to create different personas in workshop. We use this tool quite often. It's called the SPICE model. Another tool that we use to help us understand the end user better is called this ecosystem mapping, where we basically look at your end user. Once you've done the spice, you then look at what are the direct connections, people that are close to them, and then you move that out into sort of people that are less close to them. So we call it the direct connections and indirect connections. You take all those people around them, all their connections, and then you put it onto what we call a priority impact scale, where there's people that will have that is of high priority and will have high impact. And then there's people that are high priority, low impact. And you then map that out, and that helps people then understand quite nicely who are the target people that they need to focus on. This works extremely well when you're dealing with units or groups or individuals that have to engage with a broad range of people, because it just becomes so much, and this clears it up very nicely for people. They can see who are the high priority, high impact clients. Another tool that's very effective is called journey mapping. And this is basically where you track someone's journey through a process. So if you're working on a public transport system, from yesterday I showed those photographs of public transport, and I showed you the photo of the woman that needs to take these big bags and put it on the train. And so what you do is you track her journey from the time that she wakes up, and you go through each point of her journey from the time that she wakes up, right till she gets to a destination. And through this journey mapping, you basically look at their emotional state and you pick up their low points. And then and then from the design methodology, you look at, so how are you going to design out or lift up that low point and make it either neutral or high point. So the person's experience through the journey will have high points, will have low points, and you use the journey mapping to help you identify the low points and then see how do you get rid of those low points. Again, a very effective tool when you have this long journey, because there are things that could happen before she even gets to the station that you can impact on that will then make her journey better. and so it opens up your perspective of just looking at your solution, which is, let's say, the train, and looking at before she gets to the train station and after she leaves the train. How can you improve that journey if there are pain points in it? So this is journey map, and I'm going very quickly through the tools, and yeah, we'll take questions later. This one is called the 5 Whys. Again, a very powerful tool. And it's something that you'll be able to use when you leave this lecture. And it's actually something that we all used to do when we were small. I mentioned this yesterday as well. When we were 4-year-olds, you were constantly asking why, because you had this inquisitive mind. And then that inquisitive mind basically gets beaten out of you as you grow and develop up and get into structured environments. But when you're trying to get to the actual, or trying to reveal the root cause of things, then the 5 Whys is a very good tool to use. So this example here that I've got is the problem statement is the Titanic, the world's largest, most grand cruise ship of its time, is lost at sea, and we know what happened to the Titanic. And so if you ask the question why was it lost at sea? Because it ran into an iceberg. So why did it run into an iceberg? Because the captain set a course through waters known to be littered with icebergs. So why did the captain set a course through waters known to be littered with icebergs? Because it was the shortest passage between Britain and New York City. And why did he choose the shortest passage between Britain and New York City? Because he was trying to break the speed record. And why was he trying to break the speed record? Because his wealthy US passengers pressured him to get to New York as soon as possible. And so there was nothing wrong with this ship. It was a fantastic ship from an engineering technical perspective. But he was pressured through influences of some wealthy people on the ship to take a course, which then ended up in the Titanic sinking on its maiden voyage. And so this is an example of this why tool, which is, like I say, very, very powerful. And you can use it immediately. And sometimes you get people irritated, you're asking them why all the time, but it does get to the root cause of problems. Scenario planning is another tool, and I'm sure you people have heard of scenario planning. We did a scenario planning for South Africa was this, 2009, I think it was, yeah, called the Dinokeng scenarios. And for those people who have not yet seen it, there's the website. You can Google Dinokeng scenarios. It's named after the farm that it was held on. And in 2009, it looked at what was the future for South Africa, and they came up with these 3 futures for South Africa. The one was walk apart or together, and I can't remember the third one. But if you go now and look at those scenarios, the one bad scenario, which was just walk apart, if you had to read that scenario 3 years ago, when before our current president, the scenario that they painted out in 2009 was pretty much playing out in our country, and so it was very scary to see where the country was heading at that point. And so this is the power of scenarios. It's like I say, not predicting the future, but it says, if we do these things, this is where we can potentially end up. So if you have not yet seen the Dinokeng scenarios, are really, and you're interested in this whole field of creating the future, then this would be a good scenario to have a look at. You can download all the presentations, the Word documents, everything is on the website. A really good resource to get your mind into scenario planning, but it also looks at the future of our country and how you can play a role in creating one of these better futures than the walk apart one. So scenario planning, extremely powerful, but it does take quite a while to do that. And so it becomes very difficult to run scenario planning in a workshop environment if you have people just for one day. And so what we do is we use a shortened version of scenario planning called backcasting. And the backcasting basically says we envision a future, and we visualize it. We normally get people to draw that future in 20, 30 years' time. And then we say, okay, so now we've achieved this future. And then we look back to today and we say, so how did we get there? What actually happened that allowed us to get to this future scenario? What did we do? What happened in the country? What happened around us that allowed us to get there? And we use this axis of success and failure, and then fast and slow. And so we say, what allowed us to achieve the scenario quickly, so success fast, and we take input from the room and we put all of those input into that top right hand corner. So we capture all what people believe we as a company or as an organization or as a unit did that allowed us to achieve success fast. We then move to the second quadrant and we say, okay, so we achieved success, but it was fairly slow. Other people were doing it and we were trying to catch up with them, and then we capture those things. And then we look at the failure. So we just don't achieve this future, but we don't achieve it and it happens very slow. And this is what we call the danger zone, because this is pretty much business as usual. A lot of businesses fall into that trap where we've been doing things this way, this is the way it will always be in the future. And you're failing, but you're failing slowly. You don't even realize it. And then the last quadrant is where you look at failure and it's fast. Things just fell apart very quickly. And these are normally sort of big things like a revolution or collapse of economic system, something. So it's, and once you've put that out, you then say, so where are we now? And then how do we get to that success fast? So a very powerful tool that allows the team to be able to focus fairly quickly on saying that is our future vision of where we want to go. Here are a few things that we can focus on to help us achieve that fairly quickly. So this is just some of the tools that we currently use. Before I move on to the disruption, any questions around the tools? Anyone wants some clarity on any of the tools? I can't see the chat, so if there are anyone, you can just unmute and if you have any questions. And I'm going fairly quickly through the tools as well. I mean, normally we'll run workshops with people to introduce the tools and take them through it. No questions on the tools. Okay, cool. Let's then move on to this whole concept of disruption. And so when we talk about the future, we're talking about things disrupting us, and COVID is a very good example. COVID disrupted traditional planning and what organizations were business plans and future scenarios they'd set up. The COVID really disrupted that, and so we see that is the way the world operates. There's always these disruptions, sometimes at a mega scale like COVID, but then on a smaller scale as well, sometimes at a continental level, sometimes at a country level, and sometimes even at a city level. These things disrupt your business or disrupt your organization and the planning that you had for the future. And so how do you make your organization more agile to respond to this disruption? How do you make yourself more agile to respond to disruption? And one of the ways to do that is to learn not to focus too much on detail. Yes, we need to do the detail when we're delivering stuff, but if you want to look at how do you contribute to this field of futures, you need to slightly lift your head up and look into the future, and you look at what are the trends that's out there. And depending on which field you are operating in, you will have different trends that you look at. And so in some of the work that I was doing in the engineering space, we came up with these 4 or 5 trends that were influencing or could influence our space. So it was the whole other thing around the renewable and how renewables was influencing the whole thing around obviously ICT impacts many spaces. Then there's this whole thing around materials, and I'm not sure how many people have heard of graphene. It's a new 2D material, and it's very strong, 100 times stronger than steel, and it's a perfect thermal conductor. And so once graphene gets into production, it will completely change the way we build things. So you'll be able to build a plane with graphene, and it's so thin that you'll actually be able to see through the walls of the plane. And because it's a good thermal conductor, you'll be able to use it in batteries, and it will completely change the way batteries store energy. So graphene, once it gets to production stage, will dramatically change the world as well. And then proteomics, some crazy things happening in that space. We're going even beyond DNA down to the protein level of things, and that you talk about designer babies and these sort of things, which, yeah, so it's a very interesting field, and can again dramatically change our future. It's a trend that's unfolding very rapidly. And then mobility. Mobility's been around for a very long time, but it is again something that impacts society, impacts people dramatically, and so mobility is another trend that we were watching. So when you talk about the future and try not to be disrupted by it, you need to look at the trends instead of what is the technology in the let's say mobility space. And so I'll just use mobility as an example to show you what I mean by this. If we look at the mobility space, and specifically the horse and cart, so the horse and cart came about in about 5th century BC, and it was basically around for 25 centuries, up until the early 1900s when Mr. Ford manufactured the Model T vehicle. And once he set up a production line for the Model T in 1914, assembly line for the Model T in 1914, it took 14 years to obliterate that industry that had been around for 25 centuries. 14 years and that industry was finished. And so if you fast forward from 1914 to today, we see we moved from the Model T in 1914 to this situation. People sitting in lockjam traffic in less than 100 years. And so the question is, if it took 14 years to disrupt an industry that's been around for 25 centuries, how long will it take to disrupt this industry? And the normal response from people is, well, it's not going to happen because everyone needs to move, everyone needs a vehicle, it's too many people employed in the industry, it's big companies. It's a lot of the same reasons that the horse and cart gave in 1914 for why they would not be disrupted. And so and so if you look at the trend of mobility, people need to be mobile, but it doesn't have to be in the shape and form that you are currently using. And so this helps you when you look at trends instead of the detail of the technology. It helps you to conceptualize, visualize this future scenario and make you more agile as an individual, but also as an organization. But this world of rapid disruption, it's all around us, and the technology basically just accelerates that. And so we see these brands that have been huge disruptors, and they all of these brands, what they have in common is that they understand consumer trends before they become trends. They create this consumer trends. But also they use creativity and design to unlock very successful innovation. And they all have a very deep understanding of their end users. So there's questions around ethics and models and business practices of these organizations, but from a business perspective, and a financial perspective, they've been fairly successful. And so even organizations like Airbnb, right now looking at how do they pivot during COVID. But what many people don't know is that Airbnb was, when it launched, it was not very successful. It was on the verge of closing, and they just couldn't understand why people was not using the product. and they came across this whole concept of design thinking and said, okay, maybe that's a good idea. Let's go speak to our end users. And so that's what they did. And they went to people and said, well, why are you not booking on this app that we have? It's fantastic. It's cheaper than the hotel or motel you're staying in or guest house you're staying in. And the responses they were getting was that, well, if I open up your app and I look at this photograph of the room compared to the photograph of a guest house, I just don't want to stay in this room. This is an untidy room. It's got things laying around. And what they realized was that the way the app was designed, people could post their own photographs of their room on the website. And so they prototyped very quickly to say, let us appoint a professional photographer to go out and take photographs of people's rooms. And that was the turning point for Airbnb. They didn't have to change the app. There was nothing wrong with the app. It was just the photograph. And they discovered that through this design thinking methodology to say, let's speak to the end user. So disruption happening all around us in all industries, and as well as in the higher education space. This report was developed not last year, the year before, around the future of universities thought book. And what they were saying is the majority of kids currently entering primary school will end up doing jobs that do not exist today. And so if that is the case, how does a university respond to that? We know universities are this massive things that's very difficult to change direction. But this is the reality of the future of higher education. And so if we look at education in its normal context of the way we understand it, we have primary school, and then we go to high school, then we go to university, and then we go to work. And that is sort of set in most people's minds of how you go through the different levels of your career. And what we find is that many corporates or organizations say, well, universities are not preparing students for the real world. We hear this often, although they still come to universities to find students, but they like saying that. And so we see that some corporates and some organizations say, well, should we bypass the universities? And we see this sort of trend happening where businesses are saying, maybe we can get students straight out of high school and train them up ourselves. If that's the case, then what is the competition for universities? What is UCT or in other universities' future competition? Is it another university, or is it these massive organizations that have serious money to throw behind something? And if Apple opens up a university tomorrow and your child has the option of going to a University of Cape Town or to Apple University, and they're into technology, UCT is going to struggle to attract someone against someone like an Apple University. And so we see this happening already. And not sure how many people know Dyson. Dyson is a design company from the UK. They do this fancy hair dryers and other things, air conditioners and stuff. And they decided that they want to set up an engineering university. And they want to become the best engineering university in the world. And so that's what they've done. They've set up this university, and if you go to Dyson Institute and you graduate from that institute, you graduate without any debt, right? And you gain professional engineering experience from your first day at university. You're basically embedded into the Dyson organization, hands-on experience with other engineers, and you start learning about industry, start learning about the products, etc., from day one. And so it's a much more hands-on approach to training. But then they've done something also very interesting. This hardcore engineering field, they've blended in and brought in this creativity. And so one of the courses that you get taught as part of your engineering is this whole thing around cooking. And they bring in like the master chefs into Dyson to teach students how to cook. And so when you graduate as an engineer from Dyson Institute, you are also a pretty good chef. And so you see these sort of exciting things happening. There's other things impacting traditional universities as well, like Minerva. When you go to Minerva, the first year at Minerva, they basically teach you how to think. Regardless of what you're going to study, the first year is all around thinking, around the systemic thinking, critical thinking, and they move you around the world to different countries for each semester as well. So again, a university that's currently disrupting the current universities that we know, or the current university models that we know. And so with this disruption taking place in the higher education space, the University of Cape Town asked themselves, what are they going to do? And the Vice Chancellor, Mkhethi Fakhen, when she became VC in 2018, she established the UCT Futures think tank.
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
Oops. There's that. She established this UCT Futures think tank to look at how does UCT respond to this disruption in the higher education space. And the think tank was made up of people from internal, across the university, different faculties, but also some external people. And that's how I got involved with UCT on the futures journey. And so this is where we use this double diamond methodology. We started off in September 2018 with this concept of how does UCT respond, and then we diverged that thinking fairly quickly and we landed at a very different space. And it wasn't about UCT responding to the disruption. It was actually about how does UCT become a disruptor. The University of Cape Town on the African continent should be a disruptor instead of trying to respond to disruption. And so that divergent thinking just helped the university do that. And then we converge that into a concept that we call this massive transformative purpose, which I'll talk about as well. And it's what's this future that UCT wants to be part of shaping. And then from there, we diverge that again into the Vision 2030, which was this broader initiative across UCT. And so the double diamond was used quite effectively on UCT's journey of trying to position itself as a shaper of the future instead of responding to the future. And we landed with this thing of saying that we established a thing called this African Futures Catalyst, which was some futurists, some design thinkers, some creative people, and they basically were this cohort of people that was helping and the university to transform. And so their mandate is to enhance the core of UCT with this lens of complexity, futures, and creativity. And with that, you're looking at how do you position UCT in the external world as well with its stakeholders and through different relationships. And part of that was setting up this, what we call this triple helix, which is the collaboration between government, academia, and industry, which requires a lecture on its own. And so we developed this methodology for UCT, which looks basically at this whole human-centric innovation, introducing people to these concepts like we're doing now over these two lectures. We then go through what we call unlocking the superhero in your team. And this is about saying, understanding your strength, understanding your team's strength. If you want to innovate, you need all these different worldviews. And then we come up with a massive transformative purpose, which is this future world that you see and you want to move towards, and then you do some scenario planning. So this was the methodology that we've put in place and which is now being used to help UCT on the journey. So what I want to do is just show you one of the units that we worked with. This is a workshop capture, which is something, once we've taken people through a workshop, we then put this together into a presentation, which we give to them, and they can then use this presentation to speak to the other stakeholders, speak to the other staff, to people who are not part of the workshop, to explain to them the journey that they are on. So The first thing we do is, like I said, we go through these lectures that we've done yesterday and what you're doing today. Then we move into this thing of saying, understanding your superpower. When we use this code, this thing called the innovation code by Jeff de Graaf. If you've not done it, that's if you Google innovation code quiz, you'll come up with something that says, how do you innovate? It's a literally a 2-minute quiz that you can do. And what it does, it tells you what's your archetype. And what the innovation code says that when you want to successfully innovate, there's 4 archetypes that people generally tend to fall into. There's this artist archetype, the athlete, the engineer, and the sage. And if you want to successfully innovate, you actually need all 4 of these archetypes around the table. And what happens is, in the sort of engineering world, you tend to get a lot of engineering people coming together and they lose the other archetypes. And so, again, when you're working in a team, make sure that you have all of these archetypes around the table. I'm not going to go too much into detail with this, but this is a lecture on its own, just the innovation code. But the artists are the people that will wow you. They're the guys who want to go to Mars. And opposing that, you have then the engineer. The engineer are the people that de-risk the organization, and they say, no, you can't go to Mars. We don't have a rocket that can go there yet. So that's the 2 scales that oppose each other. And the other scale, you have the athlete. The athletes are the ones that says, I know what my goal is. I know what I need to do to win, and I'm going to win. And don't get in my way because I will take you out. So they're the guys that deliver on things. And opposing that, you've got the sage. The sage is the one that says, let's play nice, let's bring everyone along, let's speak to more people, let's keep the peace. And so this is a very simple model, but extremely powerful. And the teams that we worked with have found it extremely useful. Once you understand what your strength is, you know what your weaknesses are as well. And then you know your team around you, what their strengths are, so you can use that. And so between the artist and the engineer, that you actually need what we call constructive conflict. You need the tension between them, because if you don't have the tension, you won't innovate. You'll just carry on business as usual. And so this tension between the artist and the engineer determines the scale of your innovation. On the other scale, you've got the athlete and the sage. The tension between them determines the speed with which you will innovate. A very simple model, but like I say, very effective. And this is the S-curve of most organizations. It starts off with the artist having a bright idea, but sometimes the artist can't take it through the whole S-curve. That's why you need to bring in the athlete. You can set the deadlines. You can bring in the sage and make sure the right people are around the table. And then the organization grows towards a hardcore engineering business that runs on processes and systems. And then a very interesting thing happens. It's what we call the point of creative destruction. This happened in Apple. Steve Jobs was the artist. The business grew to a hardcore engineering environment, and then the engineering environment clashed with the artist Steve Jobs, and they actually kicked him out of the business. And the business was basically going nowhere. And when they brought him back 2 years later, he came in and basically brought that artist culture back into the organization, and that was the next kick for Apple. Most organizations go through this, and again, it's a very powerful tool to use. I've seen it's already 20. I'm going to go very quickly through these last few things because I just want to leave some time for questions. So once we've done the innovation code, we look at the massive transformative purpose. This is this vision of the future that you see, and you need your organization to have this future vision. And for us, it's what we call this your North Star of your organization. It's a core purpose of why you exist. And it's this future world that you see that you want to be part of shaping. So this is bigger than your own organization. It's bigger than your vision and mission statement. It's really this future that you're saying as an organization, you believe you can make this positive contribution. And so it's this passionate thing. It's this inspiring thing. When people hear it, they want to be part of it. It's positive. It's highly aspirational. And of course, it's massive. And so some examples of organizations that have used the MTP. Google is organize the world's information. Philips make the world healthier. Singularity University positively impact the lives of 1 billion people or more. And we've done one with DTPW, the one on the top right, Transport and Public Works in provincial government. And they moved from this concept of just building more schools, more hospitals, more roads to say their whole purpose of existence is enabled communities leading dignified lives. And so it's just, like I say, this big thing that you move toward. In the case of UCT, we took them through the exercise, and UCT landed with this massive transformative purpose: unleash human potential to create a fair and just society, which is, again, this massive aspiration. It doesn't talk about higher education, it doesn't talk about teaching and learning, it talks about a future society that you want to be part of creating. And the exercise that we use to come up with the massive transformative purpose is this 5 whys. We ask people, why do you actually exist? So in the case of this case study that I'm showing you now, primary healthcare, we took them through this exercise, and you use the sticky notes to go through it when you run the exercise. And we took them through this, and they landed with these sort of concepts. These came out quite clearly from the exercise we took them through. And so their massive transformative purpose for primary healthcare was inspiring collective action for well-being and social justice. And so this now fits under the UCT's massive transformative purpose of unleashing human potential. But it is something that they, as a unit, now have ownership of, that they've jointly co-created, and will help them with their strategy moving forward. There's a checklist we have for the MTP. And then you'll see it's a very creative exercise. Once you've come up with your MTP, we actually ask you to draw that. And then people have to present that back to the room, what they envision this MTP to be. And there's some really interesting drawings that come out. But it looks very playful and fun. But behind these drawings, there's a lot of thought that has gone into it, and strong messages of what people see for this future. But this is important, because if you don't have this vision of this future that you're moving towards, you end up in someone else's future. And so the MTP is a very important step for an organization in moving towards becoming future focused. You need to have this vision, and you need to actually draw this vision of the future. And so we take them through the innovation code, the massive transformative purpose, and then we do a backcasting exercise with them. Like I explained to you, we use this quadrant of success. So we say you've achieved your massive transformative purpose in 20 years' time. How did you get there? And then we capture all of those elements basically in this first quadrant. So they put all of those things up, and then we say, okay, cool, you've now achieved success, but it happened slowly. Other people had already done it, you were following, and then you capture those sort of things in that quadrant. The third quadrant, which is the danger zone, is you're failing, but you're failing slowly. And what are the elements that got you there? And so we see those sort of things coming through quite strongly: silo thinking, resistance to change, lack of diversity, all things that will cause that caused slow failure. And then we look at fast failure. This is just civil unrest, overt corruption. So this gives you a very quick snap scan of what people in the room are feeling about achieving the massive transformative purpose. And then we do an interesting exercise. We ask them to actually put on the map where they believe the unit currently is. And so you saw a lot of people on the left at the bottom as well. So that's not a good space for people to be. And so the challenge is then, how do you move them from the bottom left to the top right? And then we look at the top right, and we focus and zoom into specific things that we believe. So we can't influence all of these things, we do all of the items that's been captured here, but there are certain things that's within our control and where we can focus on. And so you identify 3-4 focus areas that you want to do as a team. And so the primary healthcare, they went through this exercise, and they identified the 4 things that they want to focus on, which was building a coherent, trusting team, influencing the faculty strategic plan, influencing the curricula, and then co-creating national health. And so those are their focus areas in moving forward. And so we take the focus areas, you take it with this massive transformative purpose of inspiring collective action for well-being and social justice, and you basically set this unit in the direction of saying, that's what you focus on, that's where you're moving towards, and this is how you can contribute. And as you saw, it was a very creative exercise, and so it's about encouraging this creativity and bringing this creativity back into organizations. And ultimately, it is about, the University of Cape Town has embarked on this journey of saying we've got a Vision 2030, which is this big, grand vision of the future. And so a lot of the stuff that I've spoken about now, a lot of the methodologies that they use, if you go just Google UCT Vision 2030, you'll get onto this website, which takes you through the methodology that was used. So if you are interested in finding out more about what I've spoken today and the methodology that UCT is using, you can go check it out on this website. So it is now 1:45. I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any questions at this point. That is basically the end of the presentation. I did say I'm going to speak about the complexity tool, and I've got a few slides just to show what that is, but maybe if there are any questions at this point, happy to take any questions. Questions? Are the people still there? I can't see the chat, but
I don't see any hands up, and I haven't seen any comments in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, cool. There's one hand up. There's one hand up. Let me just see who it is. Linda.
Hi. I don't know if can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I know we're talking about corporates and bigger organizations, etc. But I'm just thinking out loud. When it comes to mental illness worldwide and on a personal level, is there something that one design thinking can be used in terms of psychology, or the bigger question may be mental wellness?
So I know the design thinking has definitely been used in that space. Again, just because it is this human-centric approach and this whole concept of deep empathy. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that design thinking is a silver bullet for everything, and I've said this yesterday as well. Because sometimes people who sell design thinking just try and say, no, this is going to solve all your problems. But what it does do is it allows you to bring this concept of empathy into your organization in a very different way. And so that for me is extremely useful, not only in mental health, but in many fields. And we've seen with COVID, it is something that the world desperately needs, this concept of empathy. Be it whatever professional you are, entrepreneur or startup, this concept of empathy. And so the design thinking methodology, which is a fairly tried and tested methodology, allows you to do that. However, we always tell people it's not about the tools. The tools are there to support the way of thinking. And so it is about, if you're talking about embedding design thinking and this change management process, it is about the personal journey that you go on. It is a very personal journey of change that needs to take place internally. And it's supported by the methodologies and tools that we have in design thinking. So in a long way, yes, it can be used in that space, and it's definitely not only for big organizations. In fact, I've used it very effectively with startups, with small companies, just to help them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't see any other hands.
Okay, cool. Let me just quickly, I'm just going to skim over the complexity course that's going to be offered by Summer School fairly shortly. So I spoke about complexity in its broad context and at a very high level. And on the journey, the Summer School unit also went on this journey, and basically what I showed you with regard to the the innovation code, the master transformative purpose, the backcasting. That's the journey that summer school has gone on, and Zuleika was one of the people that was part of that. And through that process, what they identified was UCT is going on this journey of Vision 2030 and want to embed these skills of the future into the organization. So how does EMS support that? And they then looked specifically at this field of complexity, because it's not an easy field. And they were able to collaborate with this organization called C Institute that have been doing applied complexity for the last 20 years. And they are in the process of launching this, what they call this cognitive engine. And it's an online platform that allows you to learn and understand complexity, but it's a self-learning platform. And so Summer School is collaborating with the C Institute to launch this program, which will then initially be offered to UCT alumni, and like I said, people who have attended this course. I think you're also eligible for a discount, and then take it to a global level. So this form of cognitive learning in the complexity field does not currently exist. You know, if you want to go study complex at university, you're going to go to university and the traditional way of learning. And so the question is, what does this thing look like? And what it basically, it says that complexity is a difficult field. And so how do you use creative ways to impart the practical value of complexity to people? And so they've come up with this cognitive engine that uses a lot of the methodology, frameworks, thinking, language of complexity, and put it into this cognitive engine. And so it's curated expert content on 20 years of applied complexity experience, and then this robust platform design. When I say design, from the colors, the everything, you know, has been chosen for a specific reason, and so, like I say, it's a world first as far as we know. It's a very unique platform, and it's about activating your creative and your analytical side of your brains. And it uses what's called adaptive cards. So this adaptive cards enforces this confidence-based repetition. So this is a very well-researched practice to optimize recalling things. And it's proven to be one of the best ways to recall is via this self-testing and these cue cards. And so that's what it uses. These questions come up, and as you answer them, if you get it correct, it tests how long you took to answer. If you get it wrong, it'll bring back the question at a later stage, and it repeats the same question. And so you get this repetitive learning taking place. So it's using this whole field of complexity and put it into a very exciting platform that will, like I say, will be launched online, and it's a self-learning, so you can teach yourself over 12, 18 months and have this better understanding of this field of complexity. So it'll give you, once it gives you an answer, it then asks you how familiar you are with that answer, and it captures all this information as you answered it. And it will have these different specializations from sociology to philosophy, quantum mechanics, linguistics is all the different areas that it covers. It's got about 20 of these areas that it takes you through to understand the field of systemic thinking better. And so you got this system thinking versus this analytical thinking. And so the traditional analytic thinking is, you know, start with something and then you break it down into its components and then you study those components. Systems thinking doesn't do that. Systems thinking is, you want to understand something, you look at the connections between stuff instead of its individual components. When it looks at systems from a microscopic level to a macro level. And so it's pulled in all of these fields of systemic thinking, futures thinking, and design thinking into this platform. And so when you go through this platform, you get exposed to this different types of thinking. So that is the course that will be launching soon. I don't have a time frame on that, but it's going to be hopefully within the next few weeks and not months that will be going live. And like I say, it'll be a world first for this type of in this field of study. So we're quite excited about that, looking forward to that, and then seeing how UCT positions itself at the forefront of this complexity thinking and embedding it into the institution. And that's a big difference. And it's not about saying we're going to make complexity and design and futures only an academic exercise. It's about saying, how do we actually take these fields and embed it into the university culture? So I'm going to leave this slide up because I think this speaks very nicely and encapsulates all the things that I've spoken about over the last 2 days, and there's 5 minutes left. So again, happy to answer any questions, or if anyone wants to make any comments as well.